The morning air was crisp with a faint scent of cut grass drifting in from the yards beyond Michael's porch. He took a slow sip of his black coffee, feeling its warmth cut through the early chill. The sky was beginning its orange bloom over Maple Creek Estates, and for a few fleeting moments, everything felt peaceful. The quiet hum of waking birds rose softly in the distance, a chorus of gentle life returning to the world. He closed his eyes, listening. Then came the screech of tires. His eyes snapped open. Across the street, a gleaming silver SUV pulled to a stop at a crooked angle, half blocking his driveway. The engine cut out, but the clatter of the door slamming reverberated down his bones. Karen stepped out, heels clacking against the pavement. Her platinum bob swung sharply as she turned to glare at him, lips already twisted into a sneer. "There you are," she barked, striding towards him. Her yoga pants were bright coral today, matching the lipstick smeared carelessly over her thin mouth. "I told you yesterday this would be a problem." Michael felt his stomach tighten. He set his mug down on the porch rail and stood. "Good morning, Karen," he said, keeping his voice calm. "Is there something I can help you with?" She scoffed, rolling her eyes so hard he thought they might vanish into her skull. "Help me? You can help this entire neighborhood by moving that hideous truck out of your driveway." He followed her gaze. His work truck, an aging Ford F-250 with peeling blue paint and a rusting rear bumper, sat squarely in his driveway, tucked close to his garage. It hadn't moved since yesterday. He'd parked it there temporarily while he replaced the rotting doorframe in the garage. The hardware store run had taken longer than expected, and by the time he returned, it was dark and his back ached. He'd planned to move it into the garage today after finishing repairs. "It's on my property," he said quietly. "My driveway. There's no ordinance against parking here." Karen snorted, folding her arms over her chest. "No ordinance? Clearly you don't read the HOA guidelines you signed. That truck is an eyesore. We have standards in this neighborhood, Michael, and we're not lowering them for this." The pause before this stung deeper than he expected. She gestured dismissively towards his house, the crumbling siding he'd been slowly repairing, and the untamed rosebush he'd let grow wild near the porch. His throat tightened with silent fury. "Karen, I pay my dues on time. I keep my grass cut and my trash bins in the garage. This truck is temporary. I'm renovating the garage entrance today and it'll be out of sight tonight." Her nostrils flared. "Temporary is still unacceptable. I've received complaints already. It's my duty to uphold the image of Maple Creek Estates. If you don't move it by noon, I'll have it towed." He blinked. "Towed? You can't tow a vehicle from a homeowner's private driveway. That's trespassing." She stepped closer, her perfume hitting him like an assault, something sweet and chemical with a nauseating undertone. "Watch me," she whispered, her voice dripping with smug venom. "Don't test me, old man. I have authority here." He clenched his fists at his sides. A flicker of panic mingled with rage in his chest. Michael had always tried to keep peace with the HOA. After his wife died, he couldn't stomach the energy for neighborly fights. He focused on repairs, quiet days, morning coffees on the porch while the rest of Maple Creek bustled by. Karen was relatively new, elected president last year after a particularly vicious campaign. Since then, her reign had been absolute. "Please," he said softly, struggling to keep his voice from shaking, "I'll have it moved by this evening. There's no need for threats." She leaned back, scanning his lined face with cool disdain. "No need for threats? Michael, you're the reason we need rules. You let this place decay. Your siding is old. Your garden is overgrown. And now this truck. If you're so attached to it, park it behind your house where no one has to see it." "There is no behind my house," he replied, his chest growing tight. "I own this lot, remember? My backyard ends at the fence." Her eyes glittered with satisfaction. "Then I suppose you'll have to deal with the consequences." He swallowed hard. His coffee had gone cold, bitterness settling at the back of his tongue. Karen spun on her heel and walked back to her SUV, hips swaying in triumphant rhythm. She paused at her door, casting one last searing glance over her shoulder. "Move it, Michael," she said flatly, "or it's gone." She slid into her leather seat, slammed the door, and backed out in a sharp arc that cut across his grass. The tires tore a thin scar through the dewy lawn, spraying dirt and damp grass blades onto his porch steps. Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of exhaust and wilted roses in her wake. Michael sank slowly back into his rocking chair. He picked up his mug, staring into the murky liquid. The world felt quiet again, but now the silence rang with tension. His hands trembled slightly as he set the mug down again. He rubbed his temples, closing his eyes, fighting back a helpless sigh. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. A text from his son, Daniel, blinked onto the screen. "Coming by later today, Dad. Hope your morning's peaceful. Love you." He swallowed the sudden lump in his throat. His eyes burned. He typed back quickly, looking forward to it. "Just a rough start today. Love you too." He leaned back in his chair, listening to the birds again, their songs now distant and fractured by the echo of Karen's threats. A part of him wanted to move the truck immediately to avoid conflict, to keep peace in his small, fragile world. But another part, deeper, older, and forged in years of working 16-hour shifts under ungrateful contractors, refused to bow. "She can't tow from my property," he thought bitterly. "She can't." But as the sun rose higher over Maple Creek Estates and shadows slipped away from his driveway, a small, cold doubt coiled in his stomach. With Karen, rules didn't matter. Only power. And today she had all of it. He exhaled shakily and watched the street, waiting for what the day would bring. By noon, the sun blazed down on Maple Creek Estates, baking the sidewalks and shimmering off windows like molten glass. Michael worked quietly in his garage, sweat dripping from his brow as he finished installing the new doorframe. His knees ached from kneeling on concrete, and his arms trembled with exhaustion. But despite the pain, he felt a flicker of pride at the work done properly with his own hands. He was tightening the last hinge bolt when he heard it, the low mechanical growl of a heavy diesel engine outside. His heart stopped. He dropped the wrench and staggered to his feet, wiping his brow as he rushed out. A tow truck rumbled up the street, black smoke curling from its exhaust pipe. The driver, a thick-shouldered man with tattooed arms and mirrored sunglasses, was already lowering the lift ramp as he parked in front of Michael's driveway. Karen stood beside him, arms folded, her coral lipstick freshened into a flawless mask. "What's going on here?" Michael called, breathless, stepping down his porch steps. His boots crunched on the gravel path as he hurried towards them. Karen didn't even look at him. "Do your job," she told the driver, who shrugged and began backing his truck towards the F-250. The chains clinked and rattled as he unwound them, looping them around the rear axle with practiced indifference. "Wait," Michael said, voice rising with panic. "You can't do this. This is my driveway. It's private property." Karen finally turned to him, her eyes glittering with triumphant malice. "Michael, I warned you. This truck is a violation of HOA standards. It's an eyesore and the board has authorized removal." He shook his head violently. "The board? When? I never received notice. You can't just tow from private land." She smirked. "I sent an email at 7 a.m. That counts as notice. You should check your inbox before accusing people of wrongdoing." Michael felt dizzy. The heat pressed down on him like a weight. His truck rocked as the tow ramp lifted it from the driveway, metal grinding against metal. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered across the street, drawn by the noise and spectacle. Some stood with folded arms, silent and uncomfortable, while others filmed on their phones, whispering to each other behind trembling hands. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "Please don't do this. I need that truck for my work. I can't afford the impound fees." Karen waved a dismissive hand, cutting him off. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before cluttering up our street. Consider this a lesson in compliance." The tow driver climbed into his cab, slamming the door. The hydraulics hissed as the truck's lift locked in place. Michael felt his legs give way and he dropped to his knees on the driveway, the hot concrete searing through his jeans. His heart hammered against his ribs and a sharp ache bloomed behind his eyes. "Please," he whispered again, hoarse and desperate, but the diesel engine roared to life, drowning out his words. The truck rolled forward, hauling his F-250 away in slow, rumbling triumph. Karen turned back to him, her silhouette framed against the blazing sky. Her shadow stretched long across his yard. "Next time," she said softly, leaning down so only he could hear, "I'll have it crushed. Junk like that doesn't belong in this neighborhood." She straightened, adjusted her sunglasses and strode back to her SUV. She paused before getting in, flicking a gaze over the neighbors still gathered. "Show's over," she called with false cheer. "Enjoy the rest of your afternoon." The crowd dispersed silently, some glancing back at Michael with pity, others shaking their heads and retreating into air-conditioned homes. Michael sat frozen on the driveway, staring at the fading silhouette of his truck as it disappeared around the bend. The air smelled of burnt rubber and gasoline. The silence left behind felt louder than the engine had been. He rose unsteadily and walked back to his porch, hands trembling so badly he nearly dropped his phone as he pulled it from his pocket. He opened his banking app. The renovation funds were low. His last roofing contract payment had gone towards property taxes. Impound fees would gut what little remained. A hopeless, hollow exhaustion settled in his chest. He scrolled through his text, stopping at Daniel's last message. Coming by later today, Dad. Hope your morning's peaceful. Love you. A tear slipped down his cheek, hot against sunburnt skin. He typed back with shaking thumbs, Don't worry about me. Just a rough day. Love you too, son. He set the phone down on the porch table and rubbed his temples, willing his breathing to slow. Memories of his wife flooded him. Her gentle scolding when he lost his temper, her quiet reminders to pick his battles wisely. But she wasn't here anymore to calm him. There was only the quiet rustling of rose bushes in the baking heat and the faint echo of Karen's laughter as she drove away. Inside, the ticking of the kitchen clock sounded like a countdown he couldn't stop. He paced to the window and watched the street. Karen's SUV was parked in her driveway across the cul-de-sac, gleaming beneath a spray of bougainvillea flowers. Through her window he could see her silhouette, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. He imagined her boasting to the board about her victory, perhaps planning her next neighborhood conquest. His fists clenched at his sides until his knuckles blanched white. He exhaled slowly, forcing the anger to settle beneath the surface of his chest. He could not win this battle by yelling or begging. He knew that now. Karen thrived on power plays and public displays of humiliation. Appealing to her decency was pointless. She didn't have any. He sat back down in his rocking chair and closed his eyes, listening to the birds again. Their song felt quieter than before, almost hesitant, as if even they feared to interrupt the stillness left in Karen's wake. He rocked slowly, the old chair creaking beneath him. Each motion soothed the tremor in his hands, grounded him in the fading warmth of the afternoon. A faint breeze stirred the rosebushes, carrying with it the scent of blooming petals and sun-warmed earth. The sweetness tangled with the bitter taste of defeat on his tongue. He swallowed hard and let his eyes drift open, watching shadows creep slowly across the yard as the sun began its long descent. In the distance, he heard the low growl of another engine approaching from the main road. This time, though, his heart did not twist in dread. Instead, it leapt with a fragile, pulsing hope. He rose from his chair, rubbing his palms on his jeans, and stepped to the porch railing just as a familiar cruiser turned into the cul-de-sac. Daniel was home. Daniel parked his cruiser along the curb, stepping out with calm purpose. He was still in uniform, his tan shirt crisp despite the heat, the gold badge on his chest gleaming in the fading afternoon light. Michael felt his knees nearly give out again, but this time from relief rather than despair. "Dad," Daniel called, his deep voice cutting through the quiet street. He shut the cruiser door and strode up the path, boots crunching on the gravel. He carried himself with a quiet authority that always reminded Michael of his late wife, that same unbreakable steadiness in the face of chaos. Michael tried to smile but felt it falter before it reached his lips. "Hey son," he said, voice rough. "You're here early." Daniel's eyes flicked to the empty driveway, his brow creasing. "Where's your truck?" Michael swallowed hard. He glanced away, unable to meet his son's gaze. "Karen had it towed," he whispered. The words tasted sour, like admitting a weakness he had tried so hard to hide. "What?" Daniel's voice sharpened. "From your own driveway?" Michael nodded, his shoulders sagging under invisible weight. "She said it was violating HOA standards. I tried to reason with her. She wouldn't listen." Daniel's jaw tightened, the muscle beneath his cheek twitching once. He scanned the street, eyes narrowing when they landed on Karen's house. Her SUV gleamed in the fading light like a predator lounging after a kill. "Did she give you official notice?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. Michael shook his head. "Just an email this morning after she threatened me in person." The tow truck came an hour later. Daniel exhaled slowly, trying to rein in the storm brewing behind his dark eyes. He placed a firm hand on Michael's shoulder. "Dad, that's illegal. HOA regulations don't override state property laws. She can't tow a vehicle from private land without court authorization." Michael felt something uncoil inside his chest. "I didn't think she could. But she just did it anyway." Daniel nodded once, his expression hardening. "Then she needs to be reminded of how the law actually works." He turned and walked back to his cruiser, opening the rear door to pull out his patrol cap. Michael watched him fit it onto his head with a precision that always made him look taller, sharper, unbreakable. The gold insignia glimmered against his dark hair as he shut the door and adjusted his utility belt. "Where are you going?" Michael asked, though he already knew. Daniel turned back, his eyes cold with quiet resolve. To pay her a visit. Michael hesitated, his pulse thudding with nervous anticipation. Son, don't cause trouble. She's powerful here. Daniel gave a small, humorless smile. Dad, she's powerful because no one has told her otherwise. He stepped off the porch and crossed the street in long, measured strides. Karen's porch lights flickered on as dusk fell, illuminating her columns in a warm golden glow. She stood on the porch, glass of wine in hand, laughing with two other HOA board members. The laughter died as Daniel approached, his shadow stretching up the steps before him. Karen Miller? Daniel asked, his voice firm but polite. Karen blinked at him, her lips parting slightly as she registered the badge. Yes, she said cautiously. Daniel adjusted his cap slightly. Deputy Daniel Carter, County Sheriff's Department. I need to speak with you about an unlawful vehicle seizure reported earlier today. Karen's cheeks flushed pink. The board members exchanged quick glances, their wine glasses frozen mid-air. She forced a brittle laugh. Unlawful? Deputy, I think you're mistaken. I'm the HOA president here, and that truck was violating community aesthetics. I have the authority. With all due respect, ma'am, Daniel interrupted calmly, HOA authority does not extend to private property seizure without due process under state law. Towing a vehicle from someone's driveway without court authorization is trespass towing. That's a misdemeanor punishable by fines or jail time depending on the severity and repeated offenses. Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Michael watched from across the street, his heart hammering with a complex swirl of fear and satisfaction. The neighbors had begun to gather again, drawn by the tension rolling off Daniel like a thunderhead. Phones rose into the air silently, recording. I think you're misinformed, Deputy, Karen stammered, her confidence faltering as she straightened her blouse. Our HOA bylaws state. Ma'am, Daniel said, voice lowering dangerously, HOA bylaws do not supersede state law. You acted without legal grounds today. My father will be filing charges for vehicle theft, property trespass, and harassment. You may also face civil litigation for damages and emotional distress. The board member stepped back slightly, eyes wide. Karen's wine glass shook in her hand, droplets splashing onto the wooden porch floor. Deputy, surely we can resolve this without legal escalation, she said, forcing a brittle smile. Perhaps your father can pay the fines and retrieve his truck by tomorrow morning. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Return the truck by sunrise, he said, his voice flat as iron. And I suggest you refrain from impersonating legal authority again. Next time it won't be a warning. Karen swallowed hard, her throat bobbing visibly. She glanced at the neighbor's recording, her smile flickering in panic. Fine, she hissed under her breath. I'll have it back by morning. Good, Daniel said, stepping back and tipping his cap slightly. Have a pleasant evening, ma'am. He turned and strode back down the path, the porch lights catching the gold on his badge with each measured step. Michael felt tears prick the corners of his eyes, but this time they weren't from humiliation. As Daniel crossed the street, the neighbors parted before him like the sea before a prow. Whispers rose among them, that's his son. He's a sheriff deputy, she messed with the wrong man. Daniel stepped onto the porch and removed his cap, shaking his head slightly. She'll have it back tomorrow morning, he said softly. Michael nodded, his voice caught in his throat. He reached out and squeezed his son's forearm. Thank you, he managed, the words thick with unspoken grief and pride. You didn't have to do that. Daniel's eyes softened, and he placed his cap on the table beside Michael's mug. Yes, I did, Dad, he said quietly. Some people just need to be reminded that real authority comes with responsibility, not entitlement. Michael lowered himself back into his rocking chair, his entire body trembling with relief. The cicadas had begun their evening song, filling the dusk with their rhythmic hum. Daniel sat down beside him on the porch steps, stretching his legs out across the warm wood. As the sky deepened into indigo and the first stars blinked alive, Michael felt something heavy lift from his chest. For the first time in weeks, he let himself exhale without fear. He watched the silhouettes of the neighbors drifting back to their homes and thought, with quiet satisfaction, that perhaps tomorrow would finally bring the peace he'd been fighting to keep. Dawn arrived with a chill that seeped through Michael's flannel shirt as he stepped onto the porch, mug of steaming coffee in hand. The sky was painted in shades of lavender and blush, quiet and empty except for the low rumble approaching from down the street. His pulse quickened as the tow truck rounded the cul-de-sac, its headlights sweeping across the trimmed lawns of Maple Creek Estates. He set his mug down and walked to the edge of the porch. The driver hopped out, avoiding eye contact as he unhooked the chains from his rusted Ford. The truck settled back onto the driveway with a final grating thud that seemed to echo through Michael's chest like a hammer blow. Relief rushed through him, followed by a flicker of anger that burned hotter than he expected. Karen emerged moments later, wrapped in a pale silk robe that shimmered like ivory in the early light. Her hair was perfectly styled despite the hour, and she wore dark sunglasses that failed to hide the tight lines of exhaustion around her mouth. She stalked across the street, her slippers scuffing the pavement with each purposeful stride. "It's back," she snapped before he could speak. "I expect it moved by tonight. Don't push your luck again, Michael." He looked at her steadily, the morning light illuminating every detail of her brittle face. "Thank you," he said, voice calm, "for returning what you stole." Her nostrils flared at the word, but before she could retort, another engine growled up the road. Daniel's cruiser pulled up smoothly to the curb. He stepped out in full uniform, his boots thudding heavily on the asphalt as he approached. Karen shifted her weight, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "Good morning, Ms. Miller," Daniel said, his voice polite but edged with iron. "Thank you for complying with my directive." Karen's mouth curled into a humorless smile. "I trust this matter is settled, Deputy?" Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Not quite." She blinked, her fingers curling tighter around her robe belt. "Excuse me?" He withdrew a folded document from his pocket, sealed with the gold insignia of the county sheriff's department. "You're being formally served with notice of investigation for unauthorized vehicle seizure, trespass towing without court authorization, and intimidation through misuse of HOA power." The color drained from her face, leaving her pale as her robe. "Investigation?" she whispered, her voice brittle. Daniel nodded, his expression cool. "We've received multiple complaints from residents regarding your conduct. The county has jurisdiction here. If found guilty, you could face fines of up to $25,000 and potential misdemeanor charges for unlawful intimidation." Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. The tow truck driver, finished with his task, quickly loaded his equipment and drove away, leaving only the low whisper of cicadas filling the awkward silence. Across the street, curtains twitched as neighbors peered out, drawn by the sight of uniforms and paperwork. "You can't do this," she hissed finally, her voice trembling with rage. "I am the president of this HOA. You're just a deputy. I'll have your badge for this." Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly, unbothered. "Ma'am, I am enforcing state law. The badge stays." Her mouth snapped shut, the muscles in her jaw working furiously. She reached up to adjust her sunglasses, but her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped them. The neighbors had begun to gather in clumps at their mailboxes and lawns, phones already recording. The quiet murmur of their voices grew louder, underscored by her labored breathing. Michael watched her carefully. For the first time since she moved in, she looked small. Not powerful. Not regal. Just a woman wrapped in false authority that was slipping away like water through cracked glass. Daniel tucked the folded document into her trembling hand. "You'll need to appear at the county office within 5 business days. Refusal to comply will result in an arrest warrant." She clutched the notice so tightly it crumpled against her palm. You can't, you don't understand what this will do to me." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Then perhaps you should have considered what you were doing to others." Her lips parted in silent rage, but no sound emerged. Slowly, deliberately, she turned and walked back across the street. Her slippers scuffed against the concrete with each step, the hem of her robe whispering around her ankles. The neighbors watched her go in silence. Michael could almost feel their collective relief rising like dawn warmth over cold grass. He let out a slow breath, the tightness in his chest loosening for the first time in days. Daniel turned back to him, his stern expression softening into a smile. "You okay, Dad?" he asked gently. Michael nodded, feeling tears well up, unbidden but welcome. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think I am now." Daniel's gaze flicked to the gathered neighbors, many of whom were still recording, murmuring about fines and lawsuits and resignations. "Seems like the whole neighborhood's awake," he said with a small chuckle. Michael smiled, feeling a flicker of humor warm him from within. "Better than coffee." Daniel reached out, squeezing his shoulder firmly. "I'll help you move the truck back into the garage later. For now, just enjoy your morning." As father and son walked back to the porch, the early sun rose fully over Maple Creek Estates, bathing the street in golden light. The scent of roses drifted on the breeze, mingling with warm earth and brewing coffee. Michael felt lighter than he had in months. His shoulders no longer carried the invisible burden of humiliation. Today he stood taller. Karen's blinds snapped shut across the street as neighbors dispersed, still whispering. Some nodded respectfully to Daniel as they passed, grateful that someone had finally drawn a line she could not cross. Michael sat back down in his rocking chair and picked up his mug, savoring the warmth against his palms. Daniel sat on the porch steps, cap in his hands, his eyes scanning the street with quiet vigilance. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them was deep and calm, like a lake after a summer storm. Finally Michael smiled and said, "Guess she should have checked your ID before threatening to call the sheriff on me." Daniel chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Some people learn the hard way, Dad." And as the sun climbed higher, casting away the shadows from his porch, Michael knew that today was a day that belonged to him, his son, and the quiet justice they had reclaimed together. Ask ChatGPT.